I'm going to recuse myself on the road. My new lawyer is going to build that.
Okay. Got it.
I don't
Okay.
think I'm on that project, but
Okay. Got it.
conflict.
Okay. You'll be sorely missed.
Okay. Well, that far. I may have another cookie.
I saw 5:29 Apple time, so. In case anyone's calling in or something.
Holding you atomic clock.
I think so. That's
More
think.
or less.
I had I was with the previous, my business group I used to meet with is Apple time. If you were late, it was $100 fine.
Apple
So,
time.
yeah. Well, the town clock says it's 5:30, so I'll call the September 5th, 2023 Town of Breckenridge Planning Commission to order. Roll call.
Mr. Gerard. Here. Mr. Fruchter.
Here.
Mr. Geller.
Here.
Mr. Lees.
Here.
Miss Proper.
Here.
Mr. Guerra.
Here.
Miss Gort.
Here.
Fellow commissioners, any changes to the minutes from the last meeting? I'll take that as a no. Next, are any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes tonight.
Okay. As part of certified local government, we're asked to take public comment on historical preservation issues in the community. With that, I'll open the meeting to any public comment. If you're attending the meeting by phone, press *9 on your phone, then *6 to unmute yourself. Yes. Janet.
Hello, I'm Janet Sutterly and I'm a local architect and I'm finally bringing this to your attention. Oh. Something I've been actually wanting to talk about for a couple of years now. I have discussed it a little with Chris. But I have noticed the number of historic sheds in town that we are losing by demolition by neglect. And there are a number of them. We've discussed a few of them. We're not sure if legally we're allowed to do anything, but I feel like it would behoove the town to have a look at that, because we are going to lose probably 2 more this year if it's going to be a heavy snow year. And I don't want to state where they all are right now, but that would be something to do, could be done with staff. But I don't know how you all feel about it, but that is a concerning thing to watch this happening. And I just wanted to bring that up. So thank you.
Are these sheds in the historic district?
Yes, they're in the
Okay.
historic district,
Okay.
right? And I've seen, a few of them go in the past, but we're about ready to lose a couple more. So not sure if legally we can do anything or not, but there it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's tough, but I mean, I guess at a minimum, we could reach out to the property owner, maybe.
I don't know if Janet's ears were burning or my ears were burning, but I have notes at home that I was going to initiate at this time spot, that very thing. My daughter right now works at the downtown Starbucks and we were trading cars. And as I was standing back there, I was looking at the little building that they have behind their business and thinking, this thing is the definition of demolition by neglect. Look at this. And it's a terrific little building. I even took pictures of it on my phone to use and was going to have somebody technically wise be able to put them up so you could look at them. And my recommendation was going to be that we just do a little informal research into the buildings that are going down by demolition by neglect at this point in time, and then start a reach out project to say, hey, we might be able to help some way or work with something, because there are some really interesting and nice sheds and buildings, small buildings that are going to leave us if we don't do something about it. So thank you and kudos to you for bringing this up at this point in time, because it's important.
Do property owners have no obligation to maintain sheds? Historic sheds? No. Only if they've done it, doing like a class, a major renovation or something, yeah.
And we've caught many of those as we rehabilitate projects in the historic district, and they've done a great job of stabilizing and bringing them back up, and it's a wonderful asset, but we don't have the ability just to go out and say, and make them do it.
Mhm. Oh, Howard Schultz has a lot of money. He can afford to maintain it. You can reach out to Starbucks. No, that's what I figured,
Yeah.
yeah.
They're just a lesson.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Any other, okay. So we have nothing on the consent calendar. So first up is a final hearing. 114 South Main Street redevelopment. 14 PL 2023-0077. And
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Sarah Crump, Planner 3 for the record, with you this evening for this final hearing for the redevelopment of 114 South Main Street. The proposal is to construct a new 5,680 square foot building on this already developed lot in the historic district of downtown within the commercial core character area. The existing building was determined previously not to be historic and therefore will be demolished. And the proposal is to construct this two-story commercial retail and restaurant and exterior food and beverage establishment in its place. Previously, the preliminary hearings were held May 16th and July 18th. So I'll go over some of the consensus from the last meeting, and then I'll cover the changes that have you can identify from the last meeting until now. And we will also cover the final points analysis for this hearing. So just some points of consensus from the last hearing. There were some considerable changes to the cornice shape and height and a reduction of the steel cornice previously, and the commission agreed that those changes met priority design standard 228. You also agreed that for the building height of 30 feet, -5 points should be assigned, and that was appropriate. Under design standards 211, 212, and 219, the proposed changes to the elevator shaft came into compliance with those design standards from the handbook, with the change to the elevator shaft being now in the center of the building and a new gable roof form instead of the previously proposed single shaft off to the right. And at the last hearing, you also agreed that the upper story windows solid avoid ratio on the front facade does meet design standards 95, 96, and 223. It was also pointed out by a couple commissioners, both agreed that the proposed storefront previously at the second preliminary hearing still had an amount of glazing and front window fenestration that was not completely compatible with the historic design standards. And so you'll see all of the changes tonight reflect those comments of materiality and glazing on the front to hopefully satisfy those concerns from the previous hearing. So the changes since the July 18th hearing. So we can see that the front facade has been altered to reduce the amount of glazing, and the windows have been changed to have wooden trim instead of aluminum. And the side wooden trim actually comes in a little further than it did previously. The kick plate material has also been changed and altered to, instead of be metal sheets, it's now stone with metal steel brackets in between. Or I guess strapping rather than brackets. The transom above the doorway has been maintained. And then we also can see that some of the wooden trim pieces on the cornice and along the belt course have just been slightly more refined and details added at this stage. With the final hearing, they'll have just a much more polished look at this point. And then finally, they have changed how the brackets at the belt course fit against the building. They were previously proposed to be flat, and now they're affixed and a more perpendicular with an angle, so they can be seen from the street level. And then on the rear facade, some changes. We can see that the two proposed rear entry doors, instead of full light, they're now half light doors. So I'll go over how these meet the historic design standards under the architectural compatibility standard. So standard 218 from the handbook and this particular character area requires that the pedestrian street level storefront identifying characteristics be maintained. Staff agrees that this new proposal still meets that design standard 218. They've eliminated a more modern interpretation of the storefront, and this is really in alignment with the characteristics that the handbook describes as were typical details for a historic storefront. They've also, with the changing of the kick plate material from steel plates to the stone material, this is still compatible with design standard 225, which talks about masonry, brick, or stone being acceptable accent materials on the front. So staff believes that the change does comply with design standard 225. All of the historic or the architectural details that I mentioned as changes earlier, the attention to some of the extra wooden trim and along the cornice up here and the belt course details, as well as the steel bracketry. These would be part of design of, discussed under design standard 228, which talks about ornamentation and detail. Staff believes that these changes do comply with 228. We appreciate the slight alterations that were made and feel that, this simplification really enforces the historic district standards, but it is not an overly ornamentatious building, which wouldn't be historically found in the district. And finally, moving on to design standard 231, 232, and 233, which for the character area discuss the utilitarian nature of the rear facade. Changing the doors to be half light instead of full light reinforce that utilitarian use of the rear. It can't be confused with the storefront entry with this half light door, and there's no impression of a storefront on the rear. It reinforces the alleyway that should be perceived. I did want to cover employee housing impact mitigation, which is also under policy 24. It's section C. So with the refinements that were made to the floor areas inside, staff calculated that there would be 4,324 square feet of retail, 618 square foot of food and beverage retail area, and 1,243 square feet of exterior food and beverage in the rooftop. This would generate about 8.06 employees, but this application will get credit for the existing commercial use on site. So there is no net new employee generation. There is a finding in the findings and conditions which are attached and were included in your packet that should the floor areas on the interior change or, maybe they swap some of the retail for a more generous bar area, those calculations we made again at the time of the building permit application. So we would catch if that change is made. So finally, I will just speak to all of the policies which have point assignments. Under policy 6A, which is building height, and they are meeting the standard for the district, which recommends a height of 25 feet for Main Street. But in the core commercial area, the design handbook, it says that they should meet building heights of neighboring historic buildings and roof lines. So they are at 30 feet, which meets the handbook of design standards, but again is qualifies for -5 points in the development code under policy 6R. So -5 points are assigned for building height. Under the parking policy 18R, we are awarding +2 points for a commercial building in the district, which offers at least 2 off-street parking spaces. This proposal includes 8 parking spaces in the rear, so they are awarded the +2 points under that. Under energy conservation policy 33R, they will be getting 3 points for installed electric vehicle chargers in the rear. They're also including 310 square feet of heated paving on the patios. I think the lower patio and stairway level 2 patio. This qualifies for -1 point under the development code. And then finally, they will get 2 positive points for providing an energy assessment that shows they exceed the IECC or SSBC minimum standards by 20 to 29% for a HERS rating. This project, REMP does not apply because it was an application prior to that policy becoming effective. So for the final point analysis, that's a total of -6 points, but a +7 points under the development code. Let's see. Yes, +7 under the development code for a final score of +1. This final hearing, staff recommends that the planning commission approve this project with a +1 point analysis. And that concludes my presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay.
Apologize, Sarah, because I noticed this when I was reviewing
Oh.
for last week, but I didn't neglected to mention it to you when we were done. I think we need to add a finding regarding this approval, this development permit does not authorize any signs. There's a sign, basically a template there in the front of that building, and we need to know that a sign permit would have to be pulled and it would have to meet our sign code. So I'd suggest that we add that in the findings to not authorize that, because I don't know if that meets our code.
Yeah, I too saw that, and somewhere in our design guidelines, it says that a sign shall not say ye old shop. Do you remember that? Yeah.
Ye oldie shoppy.
Like see in New England decades ago. And so, yes, I agree with what Mark said.
I have a feeling they put that there because it looked like such a big area, and I brought that up at the last meeting.
Agree.
So they wanted to give a visual of how it's not this big blank area.
What a picture, Erica.
That wasn't already in
Let's,
the findings.
Let's go with questions for staff.
Excuse me, Chair. I neglected to state for the record that
Okay.
the applicant's architect is my ex-wife and ex-business partner. However, I have no financial interest in this project, and I've stated this in the last 2 meetings regarding this, and have had no complaints.
Okay, any commissioners have issue with that? Okay, thanks, Ethan. All right, so questions for staff. Let's mix it up. Mark, you want to go first?
I have no questions.
Okay. Mike?
No questions, Chair.
Susan?
No questions.
Colleen?
Questions?
Okay. Ethan?
No questions.
Okay. And Stephen?
No questions. How easy is that?
Well, I'm not done yet. I have concerns about the employee housing. So first on the credit side, with the use, I assume that the existing square footage for food and beverage includes the beer garden?
It is counted as outdoor exterior food and beverage, so it gets like half the credit that a restaurant use gets.
Was that ever like properly licensed and classified for that, or was it kind of squatters' rights, or does that matter really? Is it-
It would be grandfathered in because they had previous.
Okay,
prior-
Actually,
Okay.
approved in, I want to say like 2016, but they did go through a formal approval
okay.
with a site plan and they actually had that bar constructed.
Okay.
So yeah, unlike a lot of the outdoor food and beverage that have just kind of been there, they actually did go through and get a development permit and a building permit
Okay,
associated with it.
But that was prior to the employee mitigation requirement
okay.
being in place. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And then, is there any plumbing or anything for a bar up on the roof? I don't see-
That is not shown now, but it wouldn't be, you know, we don't have the building specification sheets.
Got it. Okay.
It can certainly be allowed because they're going to have employee generation for that space. So if they plan to do a bar at the top, they could.
Got it. Okay, so I guess my concern is that there's the, with the square footage and basically saying that only food and beverage will be on the roof in that little bar area. They've avoided, the applicant won't have to get additional employees, because if the second floor was food and beverage, I expect that there would be a requirement for more employee housing mitigation. But the thing is that the bar and the food is there, and so how do we, I know you have a finding in there, but I know in Frisco, Prost actually puts a rope up so you can't go into the retail area adjacent to it. I just wondering if through enforcement or a stronger finding or condition that something to, how do we just, I expect with the bar there, and if it's cold outside, people are going to be spreading out into that retail area.
That's why we included the stipulation that if their area changed, it would be recalculated.
Yeah.
I don't know of a requirement that we have where we would cordon off restaurant and retail uses, but maybe Chris can speak to that more.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't done anything, I guess, like to your point about putting a rope up or anything, but they did initially come in and I think they had a smaller space. They basically were saying, oh, there's gonna be 4 seats at the bar. That's what the owners were proposing. We said, well, there's to be, obviously, if you have a bar, you're gonna have people spilling out. And so we did require them to go out a certain amount, but with that, we can't say the whole upper level or something like that needs to. So it is, it's basically approved as it is on the plans. Like we've generally, like RMU, both their places, they would show like where their fixtures are and things. And generally, I think from observation that people have kind of stayed within it. Like, you don't have people like in between clothing racks and things like that, generally having having beers, but there is a little bit of, someone could go there because usually they're their liquor license doesn't exactly match up, because if someone steps a foot over or what, I think that they have to by state law give themselves a little bit of room so they don't immediately go out of compliance. Usually the bubble's a little bit bigger than what.
Yeah, I mean, just to be direct, I think that second floor is going to become a bar area. And I don't know how we catch that or enforce that. I mean, it just seems that the numbers work out perfectly and the applicant is trying to just avoid having to kick into the employee housing fund. I'll state that for the record, but that's my concern.
I will say that staff did not use the calculation provided by the applicant. We did our own calculation to confirm. And so areas that were not included in the applicant's calculation, I did include to make sure that such as this hallway, which will obviously have patrons standing in it.
Yeah.
Another way that we will police this is when they do apply for their liquor license, planning is a sign off. So if they came in and they said, you know, the whole floor, we wouldn't sign off on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I just want to say, yeah, my concerns about that. That's all I have for staff.
Okay.
All right. Eve, anything, would you like to add anything or?
No, I think Sarah did a good job. So unless you have question,
Okay. All right, more, any questions for applicant?
None.
Okay, Mike? Elaine?
I guess one of my concerns now that I think about it, looking at the upper deck, you have the elevator coming out, and then if someone's handicapped, they have to walk over to this big ramp. Is that whole ramp required because of the height of the building, or was there a reason you guys wanted those step up stairs? Yeah, those right there. It's just a lot of space and tripping of people carrying cocktails and.
The reason for the ramp is because we have 4 risers going up from the elevator to where the open bar is there. And so we didn't want to have them to use those 4 steps. The reason we have those is because of headroom. We're trying to create as much headroom in the retail space at the 2nd floor. So if Sarah, you go down to the sections, like right there, you can see those steps. And in fact, we're trying to give as much headroom there in the retail space as possible. And in the back where the restrooms are, we are not as much concerned with the headroom there.
Okay.
So it was all, yeah, we have the restriction of 30 feet maximum height, trying to fit an elevator, and then giving as much height in the retail space. So it's a bit, that was all coming together because of that.
So if your elevator could have been 2 feet taller, you wouldn't have to have that there. Is that correct?
Correct, but then we probably would have a headroom problem and the elevator will be above the 30 feet maximum height allowed.
Okay. Thanks.
No questions.
No questions, thank you.
Chair, I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
do have a question.
Okay, sure.
Eve, I brought this up in a preliminary, the 4-foot by 4-foot elevator doesn't meet the ADA, ABAS requirements. Your elevator is too small for accessibility. And I recall Suzanne said, oh, we'll fix it.
Okay,
Which
I'm gonna have to double check that then.
which drives your stair dimensions and all sorts of surrounding details.
Can you go to the floor plan? Yeah, we can always double check that and adjust the elevator if needed.
Just get a what?
We can adjust the elevator as needed. I will double check the exact size of the inside cabin. Right now, we haven't worked with elevator manufacturer to know exactly what they can provide us with the inside cabin dimension.
So at a minimum, could we make a finding to be that has to be corrected and meet ADA? I know that's falls somewhere between planning and building, but. we add a finding though, just so we don't forget it, because it apparently has been forgotten once.
Cause they'll catch it under plan review.
Yeah, I mean, it will be required by building. They'll obviously review where we don't review ADA yet. But to your point, it does affect other elements within the building design.
Yeah, that tower gets larger by more than a foot in each direction.
Well, we have some extra room in the rear of the stair, like it's a bit, the stair is wider if you look at it right now. It's not, all the steps are not the same width. So we have a little bit of room to play there.
So we'll add that finding.
Thank you.
Like you said, it has to have a 5-foot circle, right, for ADA compliance?
Yeah, it's not quite that simple, but yes, generally.
There's enough room to get that.
Good catch, she did say that.
Yeah.
All right, I have no questions either. I hope that you can get a sign permit, because I do think the addition of that sign helps address the issue that some fellow commissioners had with the void, so. I think it's a
Okay.
nice idea.
Thank you. And then the name Shopee is just random. I just put that there, so
Okay, thank you.
very much.
Okay, well, any comments, Commissioner comments before we vote to approve?
No comment.
Comments?
Just my previously noted motion or
Fine.
additional finding that the elevator be ADA compliant.
Okay, great. Susan?
Nothing.
Elaine?
Nothing.
Ethan?
Nothing.
Stephen?
I just want to thank the architects and owners for listening to us, because you obviously did. And I think the changes that you ended up with have made this a really nice project. So I'm very pleased.
I'd say thanks to Sarah and staff for a good job. Thank you for your patience in going through, for the applicant for going through this. And yeah, I think it's a nice design that meets the standard, but it's not, as I said last meeting, I don't think we want it to look too identical to everything else, the neighboring buildings, because we need to have some differentiation. Okay, so in that, I would welcome a motion.
I make, Chair, I'd like to make a motion to add a finding that the elevator must meet ADA ABAS requirements, including floor size.
I think we'll need a motion for.
First and then that? Okay. Okay, thank you, Mark.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that we approve 114 South Main Street redevelopment, lot 14 of Bartlett and Shock subdivision, number PL 2023 007, with the inclusion of 2 additional conditions. And that would make them conditions 22. Nope, there's still going on. Conditions 35 and 36, with condition 35 being that this approval does not include language concerning any signage. What would you call that little thing? Any decorative signage? Go ahead, I yield.
This development does not authorize the placement of signs. A separate sign permit shall be required for any proposed signs. Must comply with that.
Okay, I accept that. And with the other condition being that the elevator comply with all ADA standards for size and placement.
Yes, ADA ABAS.
88,
legislation, ABAS is the code, ABAAS.
ABS, statutory provisions for size and placement.
Yes, thank you. Better than I could have said.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Roll call vote.
Sorry. Mr. Lees,
Yes.
Ms. Gort,
Yes.
Mr. Gerard,
Yes,
Mr. Fructer,
Yes.
Mr. Giller,
Yes?
Ms. Proper,
Yes.
Mr. Guerra.
Yes.
All right, motion passes 7-0.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Eve.
Okay. So, next on the agenda is Romer Residence, 203 Briar Rose Lane, PL 2023-0354.
Chair, before we get started.
Yes.
I'd like to
Yeah.
recuse myself because my new job, new employer will likely build this home. I don't yet know that I'd have a financial role or not, but in the interest of being better safe than sorry, I should recuse myself.
Okay, all right.
Thanks.
Any objection to the recusal?
No.
No. Okay.
Objection.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, hello, Commission. For the record, my name is Cliff Cross, Planner 2. And tonight I will be bringing the Romer Residence Single Family Proposal to you this evening. So to begin, this is proposing to construct a 3,229 square foot single family residence with 5 bedrooms and a 506 square foot 2-car garage. This project is subject to a 2020 development agreement that Town Council approved. Some of you may be familiar with the previously approved Coon residence, which is on the south of this lot. So the lot was subdivided into 2A, which is the Romer residence, and 2B, the Coon residence, which is previously approved in spring of 2022. So let's dive in. As I mentioned, it's a proposal for a single family residence. It is in the Briar Rose transition area of the Conservation District. Currently, there is a modular single family residence sitting on 2A. I can bounce down here. This modular unit sitting on 2A, that is proposed to be removed with this application. Other current existing, there is some mature trees shown on this survey up here. Other than that, the lot is relatively barren. All adjacent uses are single family resident lots. And then the Coon residence is just a vacant single family resident lot. For the project, as mentioned, it is subject to the 2020 development agreement. So it does not go by total density, it goes by above ground density and mass for this project. The above ground density is limited to 2,422 square feet, and the applicant is proposing 2,322 square feet. For mass, the project does receive that 20% square foot garage bonus for a total of 2,906 square feet of mass. The applicant is proposing 2,828 square feet, which is below that and complies with the aspects of the development agreement. Other aspects of the development agreement The town was giving these concessions. The property owner's commitments were to actually deed restrict a secondary unit elsewhere in town, which has been completed, as well as provide a public trail easement in the rear of the lot. So on the western side of the lot, which has also been completed. So they have, I guess, complied with the development agreement. To jump into some of the policies for policy 2A, 2R, they are not proposing any significant changes with this. For density, like I said, it is subject to the development agreement signed by town council. They are complying with both the density and mass portions of that development agreement. Policy 7R, site and environmental design. Landscaping is proposed on all sides of the home. As you can see by the survey, there is not any existing really. The retaining walls on site are proposed in the side of the residence and in the rear. They are below 4 feet. Staff has no concerns. The placement of the structure, staff finds it complies with this policy. They meet all of the recommended setbacks for this character area. The applicant is proposing 408 square feet of functional snow storage, which complies with the 25% minimum. For parking, this is a 5-bedroom residence, so it is required to have 4 spaces. There will be 2 parking spaces within the garage and 2 exterior in front of the garage. Staff does have additional comments that we'll address later in the Handbook of Design Standards. For policy 22A and 22R landscaping, staff has visited the site and confirmed that the only grouping of trees in this property are the ones to be removed with the modular home. There are no other portions of the land covered with any canopy. Staff finds that the proposed landscaping does enhance the natural aspects of the property and will provide public benefit both on the street side of Briar Rose and on the western side of that new public trail easement. Based on the precedent from just previously approved projects, the Coon Residence, Ridge Street Residence, and Adams Place Townhomes, staff is making the recommendation to reward positive 2 points for their landscaping plan. With that, staff would like to get your opinion on it. So there is a question for that policy 22R, an awardtion of positive 2 points based on the past precedent and being able to provide some public benefit to this property. At this point, we are going to shift gears a little bit and go into policy 24R, which is going to deal with the standards for both the transitions areas, the general standards, and then the standards specific for the Briar Rose transition area. So impact, priority design standard 257 and 258 regarding the stepping down in scale. Staff finds that it complies. The proposal or the property, the applicant proposes a height of 2 stories, which does match similar buildings in the area of 2 stories and 2.5 stories on Briar Rose. For massing and scale, priority design policy 259 and 260, kind of regarding scale and above ground density. Staff finds that it complies both with the development agreement as well as using a 1-story element to receive that pedestrian scale with the primary structure in the garage. For design standard 317, regarding the west-facing massing and solid to void ratio, staff also finds that this complies. The home does step down with gable roofs and the facade width. They're very similar to other properties along Briar Rose Lane. Design standard 217A regarding the rear yard setback. This property does propose about 116-foot setback from the rear property, which is very in tune with other properties on Briar Rose and that clack portion. Clack placer. For roof and building forms, the priority design standard 261 and 262 regarding the gable roof forms and rectangular massing. Staff does find that it complies as the applicant proposes gable forms primarily as the roof form and rectangular massing as also the primarily mass form. For pedestrian orientation, design policy, priority design standard 263 and design standard 264. Staff doesn't have any concerns as the applicant is proposing a primary entrance that is clear with a gabled roof structure over the front door. Additionally, for design standard 265 and 266, regarding materials, massing, and human scale features, the applicant is proposing consistent materials that were previously approved with the Kuhn residents. The horizontal siding, vertical siding, random width, edge, rough sawn wood for the garage are all very similar proposed materials. And the house also does step down on all sides with smaller roof forms and shed roofs. Staff doesn't have any concerns. Jumping into our automobiles and parking, design standards 267 and 318, both regard the visual impacts of the garage, as well as 275 that considers using secondary structures for utilitarian functions as such as parking. For this particular project, let me jump up to the attached garage is proposed as the closest structure to the street compared to the residence. The garage doors are also facing the Briar Rose Lane right-of-way. The proposed location of the garage is discouraged both by 267 and 318. But the garage, or further, the garage is not detached or set aside like 275 specifies and 318. Staff does recommend -3 points for the orientation of the garage facing that Briar Rose Lane right-of-way. And we have another question for the commission. Does the commission agree with that the orientation of the garage incurs the -3 points under design policy or design standard 318? And another note, design standard 268 deals also with the visual impacts of garages, but specifically looking at the third bullet point using paving materials that are muted and distinguish driveways away from the street. The applicant is proposing, well, let me see. Yes, the applicant is not proposing any major changes to the paving materials. Sorry, got lost. To the paving materials to separate it from the street. Based on previous precedent, we do have from the Kuhn residents as well -3 points for not aligning with policy or design standard 268 using alternative materials, but additionally the location of the parking spots. So for the Kuhn residents, the parking spaces were 13 feet closer to the property line than this proposal. So staff is not recommending -points for the location of the parking spaces, just the materiality of the driveway, if that is clear. Additionally, staff just has a question for the commission on that. If you do agree that the materiality of the driveway incurs -3 points. Moving on to the orientation to the grid, staff believes the building's orientation complies with the standards. The largest roof form does run parallel with the Briar Rose Lane, as well as just the general footprint of the structure is oriented directly with the Briar Rose Lane. Regarding building setbacks for design standard 270, The building complies with this standard. Has met the setback away from Briar Rose Lane at approximately 42 feet to the front of the garage structure. For architectural style, contemporary interpretations under Design Standard 271. The proposed structure does feature a lot of traditional building forms found in Breckenridge with gable roofs, rectangular buildings, and traditional materials. But there is the garage located in the front yard instead of the rear, as well as the orientation. Staff still finds that this proposal complies with the standard as the materials and overall form meets the direction. Jumping into building materials, overall, staff does not have any concerns with the materiality of the proposal. The use of vertical siding, horizontal siding, as well as the rough sawn wood on the garage are all things that we have seen historically, as well as the metal roofing and composite synthetic cedar shake shingles, which will be one of the first few after the most recent code change. But all of these materials have been used historically, and staff has no concern with them. However, staff does have one concern, particularly the proposed rectangular metal accent siding that's being used as a wainscoting on the residence. Under Priority Design Standard 272A, it does guide that we want to see materials similar to those used historically, but within the transition character areas, greater flexibility is allowed within this standard. So staff does just have a question for the commission if we believe that proposed rectangular wainscoting is a material that we would be acceptable for the transition area. And then there was a photo included in the packet. What is it? Maybe. Well, we can look at it later. For building widths, staff finds that the proposal complies with the standard. The building form at its widest point is similar to those found within the Briar Rose Transition District or area. The solid to void ratio under Design Standard 274 and 319. Both of them are dealing with the solid to void ratios basically being seen historically or what can be used. Does 319 does allow for greater flexibility, specifically within this Briar Rose transition district or area. The applicant has proposed two different sets of windows that staff does have concern with. One is going to be the 4 windows on the eastern elevation that are in the upper gable. If you give me a second, I'll pull them up. So these 4 up here, they're the 2 double hung in the transom above. And then the second set of windows are the 3 windows on the western elevation up here tucked into the gable. Staff just does not believe that these align with the character of windows for solid to void ratio seen historically. So we are posing a question to the Planning Commission if we believe that the design of these windows should incur -3 points under Design Standard 319. Then jumping back to our development code, positive drainage is proposed on the property. There are a few areas on the northern and southern side of the house that drainage will be provided. And then under policy 33R, the applicant is proposing 2 EV chargers in the garage. Staff is recommending a positive 2 points for this. And additionally, the applicant is proposing, don't remember the number, 481 square feet of outdoor heated paving and walkway. Staff is recommending -1. Just a point of information, this application was submitted prior to the REMP went into effect a couple weeks ago. So it is nestled under the old code. And then finally, staff would just like to look at any exterior fixtures, lighting fixtures prior to the final approval or final hearing. So just to go over our point analysis, under 24R social community, we are providing or recommending -3 points under design standard 318 for the garage doors orientation, -3 points under design standard 268 because the driveway does not match the recommended materials for the character area, and -3 points for the 4 windows, the 2 double hung, 2 transom, and the 3 square windows in the upper gable, not typically the character found within the conservation district. Back to our development code, under policy 33R, staff is recommending -2 for the snow melt proposal and the patio and the walkway, as well as +2 under policy 22R for landscaping. That will provide some public benefit to the property. And our final is +2 33R for the 2 EV chargers that are going to be installed in the garage. The staff does have 6 questions for the Planning Commission. I'm happy to read them if you would like me to, but our final one is just agreeing with that point analysis. So at this point in time, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Cliff. I think we'll start this way with Stephen. Questions for staff.
Thanks, Cliff. Very thorough. You weren't here during the Kuhn project.
I was actually
Were you?
interviewed the day of the final hearing and I sat in the audience for the Kuhn. Yes, sir. So I was here, but I was not a staff member at that point in time.
So in that project, I had to, in the end result, agree to disagree with staff interpretation and 2 kind of significant issues. I don't know if the thought process has changed any, but I think this one is even different in a greater degree than Kuhn. How you view the orientation of the property as it relates to the town grid and not being parallel to the street. I mean, I can't find the orientation anywhere but parallel to the street as I look at it from the street. Where do you see it falling that this becomes not parallel to the street in a structure that's essentially square like this?
I mean, if I remember correctly, one of the key aspects in that orientation of the street was the front door was set on an angle for Kuhn residents. For this one, the front door is, that rectangular massing. I don't know where the pen tool is, but this rectangular massing here is kind of that main parallel massing, and the front door is immediately parallel to the street. So I don't know if I'm understanding the question.
I agree, and I really like the idea that we finally turned the door to face the street, and I think that's positive. But if you just look at the building in its entirety, it's wider to the edges of the property line, that would be north and south, than it is east and west. I mean, that's the orientation of the building. It's not longer than it is wider, it's wider than it is longer. And to me, that's the orientation to the street. The whole building is like that.
I think, if you look through and there's some, interject, but if you look at some of the example diagrams within the transition area, specifically on page 7 of 49, you can see there's an example of a historic building versus a new building. And you'll notice that the new building that they show is kind of the example is wider along there. And so I think that by being, as you point out, wider and meeting the street, it's meeting the intent of, all the diagrams, and what's kind of showed is in the background of the handbook. I'm not sure if that's something we can throw up, but in the diagram I'm referencing, there's kind of the smaller 1.5 story gable element with a taller 2-story behind it. And then it has a shed roof stepping down, and then it actually has more mass going out. But it just seems like that's consistent with some of the visuals that are presented. I understand it's not the same policy that you're referencing, but and to find there's another diagram in here, actually on the next page on 8 of of 49. And then I think there's even one more where it kind of shows like an L shape to it. And it's probably within the character area, but I was just scrolling through.
Guess just a point of information for this project as well is that with the development agreement, the lot widths do not meet our standards today. So they are narrower than what is normal, but the project is still meeting their setbacks. So they were crunched by their lot size, I guess you could say.
Which is kind of a greater solution by making your building longer than it is wider.
I think what Steve's alluding to is, are we setting a precedent for garages in the front yards of houses? Historically, people built houses, utility buildings, be they sheds or garages, were in the rear, usually on an alley, which is consistent with how Breckenridge was done. Along comes post-war housing, and people got one car, and then people got 2 cars. Now everybody that does any kind of subdivision as a major builder puts the garage in the front of the house. And I think that's what Steve is alluding to. Is that the precedent that we're starting for Breckenridge? Because it isn't a good precedent. And I understand what you're saying about the width of the lot, but anybody that knows, that's been here for a while, knows how much I dislike both of these projects. Because we went against what the requirement was for subdivision, and the town thinks they got some perceived value for it. And now we're debating about aesthetics and precedents that are important as a result of this subdivision that, in my opinion, never should happen.
Yeah, I guess I understand your comment, Mark, but I think specifically, and I think we're going a little bit maybe in a different direction from what Steve's comment was, for which we may circle back to, Steve, because I want to make sure we address your concern with the orientation to the street. But Mark is specifically talking about design standard 318, which is a non-priority design standard, which you can assign negative points on, that does specifically allow garages to be in front of the building, even though it's contrary to the more general design standards. But we had that discussion about, it does say that it is allowed, but it says if the garage is turned in such that doors are not facing Briar Rose Lane, the garage may be in front of the primary facade. Well, since if you're reading this and it was a priority design standard, I think you could obviously say it does not comply and you could fail it. With it being a non-priority, it is a relative policy and you can assign points to that. That would be the, I guess, advice of staff. I think that's what we have in the staff report. So I guess that's kind of my long response to that one.
Let's bring this back because it's questions, not comments. And so I think you were addressing orientation to the grid 269. Now, correct? Is that correct, Stephen?
That's correct.
And that
And
answers your question.
my question was, how do you see it that way when it's wider than longer? And I'll take a look at the diagram, at the drawings, like Chris pointed out, and I'll do so with an effort to be persuaded that you're right. But I just wanted to see where the thinking was on this, because looking at it, I just see it in a different way. And that was my main issue. Mark brought up the point about the garage. That was a contention on the Kuhn property, but that's allowed. And that's not a mountain I'm gonna die on, but I still don't like the interpretation on the perpendicular rule of running the ridge line primarily perpendicular.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I will acknowledge even on the diagram I referenced earlier on page 7, the building is, much wider than the historic building, but the primary ridge line in the diagram does run perpendicular to the street, to your point. So it's kind of a mixture of actually both of the ways
Runs
we're looking at it.
parallel to the street, not perpendicular. Primary ridge line runs parallel to the street. Is that what you mean?
No, the primary ridge line on this diagram on page 7, the tallest one there runs perpendicular, but the overall massing is wider than it is deep.
Right.
So primary just means the tallest,
Yeah, I mean,
meaning it that narrowly?
well, I think primary would be, in this one, I would say that the tallest one there is the primary ridge line. I'm guessing it's probably deeper than that other gable. It's the cross gable coming off on the right-hand side. We don't have a 3-dimensional drawing, but I'm assuming that one is the primary one from a.
And the only thing we have perpendicular in the project that we're discussing right now is parallel to the street, other than a small gable in front, which is kind of the opposite of that suggested.
Well, the very top one
diagram.
and the proposed one is perpendicular to the street, but it's not a very significant part of the house or the second floor. I don't know if you can say that's primary.
That was the only thing I wanted to discuss as a question.
Okay.
Sorry, Steve, which was the design? I want to go back. I'm toggling behind a couple. I want to make sure I'm reading through the bullets too, in addition to.
It's design standard 269.
Is that in our stuff here or?
It's
Oh, yeah, I see it there.
yeah, it's in
Abbreviated though.
page 12 of 49 in the handbook, and the bullet says in general, the main ridge of the structure should run perpendicular to the street is the point that Steve's making.
So what is a main ridge is our debate, probably.
Yeah, I guess we can throw maybe the elevation back on and
Page 62 of the packet.
This. Yeah. That's the dominant ridge line,
That's what I would call it.
because this is lower, this is all the same elevation. So that's the primary,
This is the highest.
but that's not,
Not the
primary doesn't mean, isn't necessarily defined by the highest.
highest. We're
It's the
defining a
dominant.
main ridge.
I would leave it up to these guys, but that's how I read it.
Primary is different.
For having side cover, I think the point of the design center is what you see from the street.
Mhm.
yeah, I think Janet's intent was to make the tallest ridge there, which is perpendicular, the primary. I think that's the intent of the design. And I guess how it relates to Kuhn, I'd have to look at Kuhn again, how we made that interpretation,
A lot
but
for discussion, so you have more questions?
See a lot of the roof going the opposite way.
Questions?
No, not this time.
Okay.
I guess I would acknowledge that even within the historic district and there are examples, Janet's probably being one of the best, her own house having her primary ridge line runs parallel to the street with two dormers popping out. So there are, plenty of examples within the historic district too. So it isn't something, we're not violating a cardinal rule in terms of that never occurring.
Well, I guess I do have a question. It's the one on all of our minds right now. What defines primary ridge? Because we don't have anything to go by here.
Main ridge. Main
What's
ridge.
Well, it might be the table. Janet may have some points to add to it
Well,
and
this is,
maybe resume this discussion after.
So Elaine, do you have, okay, so I think, I don't know if we have an answer for that question, right?
I'm looking for an answer.
Other questions? You guys okay to move on?
I think,
you-
I think that's a question we have to discuss.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know if we just.
I was to suggest that after Janet presents, maybe come back to like,
During our discussion, we can come back to that. So we'll
really,
give the applicant a chance to.
yeah, you'll be able to make that, you're the commission, you'll be able to make that decision amongst yourselves, but I think having some feedback from the architect may be beneficial to that conversation.
Elaine, questions?
How do you, I have a question about the parking because the garage, you park in the garage and then you've got two that block in everyone going into the garage. So if you're parked in the garage, you have to move two cars to get out of there. Is that reasonable parking?
It is, dimensionally correct, and they do have the turnarounds for it. It may be an inconvenience, but nothing in our town code specifies the orientation of those.
Okay. And then my other question was, how did you come up with the 3 points for the garage being facing the street? How did you calculate 3?
I believe that's just the standard that's laid out in the handbook.
Okay.
Yeah, I think just with the incremental negative, it's in multiples of 3. We thought it was something that was worthy of negative points because it's violating that one specific bullet point, but it's not, so egregious that we would throw maximum negative points at it, I guess is our logic. But again, the point decisions are up to the commission.
I think they could turn the garage so you could park in and not see the doors. I mean, it seems like they're trying to really discourage these garage doors facing the road, and we're only taking away 3 points, which they make up mostly with their electric vehicle charges. So feels like a pretty low lift for them.
I mean, I'll definitely let Janet answer
that's a good
that,
question.
but
Yeah.
changing that would impact other aspects of the project. Simply like the front yard and setbacks to that rows right of way. So as of right now, I don't know if that's an option, but I'll let Janet answer.
But there's enough turning radius space there for it to go into the garage. Or we'll have to ask them. Okay. That's all.
Susan.
Thank you. Thanks, Cliff. I have a couple of questions. First of all, on the metal siding. Is 303 South High Street the only example of that metal siding in the historic district?
I will defer that question to someone that's been longer in town.
It's the only that we're aware of, and I think Janet supplied us the example from precedent, and I think it's the only example that she's aware of as well.
Do we know when that was built? Was it built
That
at
was-
a time before there were concerns about that?
Well, it was constructed prior to the establishment of the transition area standard, so it was prior to the handbook.
Mhm.
I mean, I think, it's hard to review something that was approved on a different code, but I think if you're looking at the thing we maybe have the most objection, the scale and massing is in line with today's code. I think the roof pitches, but having, unpainted materials would probably be the most obvious thing that is different than what we would normally see here. You know, having rusted metal, it is a slightly different variation, but I think the handbook does have some allowance where for variation first in the conservation district versus in the historic district, where we're very like, is this something you would, you know, see previously on the historic structure, which the answer would be no to that. But in terms of the character of having rusted metal more broadly, that is something that we did see in the historic district, and having the design center does say, you know, you can have greater flexibility with materials. So that's a question to the commission, is under that provision of greater flexibility, is this an acceptable building material?
Mhm.
Yes, the question that could be asked on the tail end of that is if we allow the rusted corrugated metal on foundations, how much different is this?
Yeah, and I think that'd be, again, a question for the group in terms of that allowance and variation, what you're comfortable with.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, just a point of information, this home, I believe, is in the south end transition area. So it is also within a transition area of the conservation
I'm not so
district.
sure about that, Cliff.
I,
I thought that High Street was main part of the historic district.
the block adjacent to Carter Park, I believe, is this one second. I'll pull up the map.
Yeah, once you get south of Adams, it's in the transition area, but
Oh.
again,
Yeah, so the property is sitting, is it here on High Street? So this is going to be the south end residential transition character area. It's adjacent right here.
My next question about it was that building at 303 South High, as you can see from the pictures, is generally quite dark, the exterior. And you know, it's barnwood and so forth. And so the contrast between the other portions of the siding and the metal is not as great. I did notice in this proposal that the siding is going to be white. And then there's going to be this very dark metal below. Does that have any impact on your thinking about this?
It's definitely a consideration I think that staff had, but per town code, there are no aspects guiding the contrast. We do look at the chroma of colors, and white is an allowed color.
Oh, yeah, I don't have any problem with the white. I was just thinking that the metal would be more prominent as a result of the contrast with the white.
yeah, I mean, I think the material metal is not really the concern. You know, rusted metal has been used extensively in the historic district with bright colors. And I mean, we have a lot of buildings where there's a pretty abrupt transition between a painted color and then metal, or even an outbuilding that has darker materials. I think what really is more the question at hand is just almost the pattern of the metal more so than the coloring that we have for the commission tonight.
Oh, I see. Okay. And then with the windows that you highlighted, can you provide a little more explanation about what your concerns are with those windows?
Yes. So here on the eastern elevation, it's the 4 windows. So these double hung here and the transom above. Just that format, especially together, is not something that we would see historically within the conservation district. Most of them has a kind of smaller solid to void ratio. And most of them would only be double hung windows.
Mhm.
I might point out that those are awning windows.
Ethan is correct.
They were just two tall windows next to each other, that would be okay. It's just because there's that weird transom in between on the, now that you moved to the other picture.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really more about like kind of the style, and then Cliff will show in the placement of like the configuration, not so much like the total of the windows, but yeah, it's to Cliff's point, it's just like something that we wouldn't have seen traditionally, in town.
I believe the combination of the two provide a little bit, it exemplifies some confusion on like the human scale of the building, especially for this upper level, considering let's see, I believe the floor plate is right here. So they're just a little bit tall. So it does throw off that perception of human scale, especially compared to the rest of the windows on this facade.
Is that where the stair is?
No, sir. I believe this is going to be the 2 bathrooms.
No. Okay, and then what about the ones on the west
Fence fire.
elevation?
Roof
You gotta have
windows.
really good lighting in the bathroom.
And the other ones are up here, tucked way up into the gable. Once again, just it's construing the perception of the human scale, especially tucked way up in this gable. And to mark, this is on the stair area when you're accessing the upper floor.
So are those windows in the hallway as you come up the stair? Is that where they are?
Yes, sir. So you'll see here, they'll be positioned along this wall as you're going up and down the stairs, high up in the gable.
So what kind of window could you put there that would give light and be to scale? Do you have a suggestion?
I mean, I think staff is comfortable with the other double hung windows in here, or nothing at all.
The one in the middle on the top, maybe? Is it because there's 3, or I don't know.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
See like one window like up in barns and things like that, or I don't know. Would that be better? I don't know. You're the expert on this. You studied this.
That'll be something for the
Yeah, just curious.
the applicant. Any more questions, Susan?
No, that's what I.
Cliff, I have a question, and I don't know if it's a question for Janet or for you, but on the site plan, we have you related the question to the panel about the use of the asphalt as the material for the driveway. And then there's an area to the north of the driveway that is indicated, and that same symbol is indicated at the end of the driveway next to the other lot, as is at the end of the turnaround. Is that gravel, that's corbel? What material is that?
So the areas at the very end of the turnaround and the hatched are snow stack. I believe that the front walkway is going to be a stamped concrete, but then the applicant for the driveway, the applicant's just proposed, I believe, concrete. Asphalt.
The area to the north of the driveway right there that could be construed as a walkway. What is the material there?
That's just going to be lawn. That's snow stack. So it will be a mixture of native seed grass.
So that's part of the landscape. That's lawn.
Yes, sir. The hatched areas are all snow stack, as well as this over here. The only walkways are on the southern edge of the garage. as well as walking to the front door. And it's the rock-like symbol.
All I have.
Cliff, thanks for a good report. Very thorough as always. So a couple of questions about the garage. Is the garage height and angle, is that dictated by code or the historical standards, the design standards?
Not to my knowledge, no, sir.
Okay, so, and in terms of density, if it looks like there with the windows, there'll be an attic in the garage. Is that allowed to be conditioned and finished? And if so, should that count as density?
So with the recent code changes, there is carve outs for attic space, not counting as density. For it to be finished and counted in that density calculation, it would need to be livable space, which would be defined as 5-foot floor height.
Okay.
Which I have not seen a section of this, but I don't believe that it meets that.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Thanks.
Welcome.
Actually, I guess you don't have the standard, you got a carriage house, but like I was to use the standard Wellington example where there's probably a part in the middle in between the trusses that you'd be above head height, but realistically you couldn't finish it because of the trusses. It's below that 5 feet. So
Well, Wellington,
Yeah.
it's a spider web up there because they didn't,
Yeah.
they didn't do proper, they could have done nice trusses, so we had storage, but at least not my attic. In the main house I'm talking, I don't know what it's like on the garage.
it's definitely like that where you have to, you're walking.
Yeah.
To your point, there is definitely room there to achieve a livable space. If you used H truss
Yeah.
or stick frame construction above that garage.
I'm just, the reason I asked the question only because as we look and evaluate whether, negative points for the garage, another thing, and this was the case with the Kuhn garage, is that I just wondered if the garage height has to be that high. And with the windows and such, it looks like it could be something that will become a future livable space.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, to get, a roof pitch that we would typically see at a steeper roof pitch, we wouldn't want it, flattened out so much. I'm not exactly.
Better for solar too, have the higher pitch, so.
So, I mean, I think it's pretty, you look around town, whether it's new or old, and we have a lot of examples of things where I guess if you got creative and put different trusses, you could go in there, but then you would still have a pretty small, so we're looking at kind of a standard.
That pitch is also facilitating the solar panels that are indicated on that, south side.
Okay.
Also, there's no way to get there.
Yeah. Right.
To get to the space.
Yeah.
There's no way to get to it. So.
Yeah. Okay, that's my question. So we'll give Janet a chance to speak and answer questions.
Okay, we hear that. My name is Janet Sutterly and I'm the architect for the Roma residence. So I wasn't quite planning on starting this way, but I feel like I'm immediately on the defensive. And there are a couple things here I would like to address before we even get started. I have felt like on both of these projects, I am being held hostage to this lot split. I have nothing to do with this lot split at all. Nothing. And these are the two lots that I have been presented to create these programs. So I'm doing the very best I can with the lots that I have been given. So I feel like I know there are at least a couple of you that disagree strongly with the lot splits, but there's nothing I can do about that. So I have to move forward with what I have there and try and meet all the policies and address the issues. So I have 3 design goals I wanted to present in starting this project. And interestingly enough, Steve, the very first design goal was to integrate the planning commission comments from the Coon residents, especially with respect to the roof orientation and the entry orientation. That was number 1. Because, you know, where that went with Coon, and I knew that was an issue for at least a couple of you. So the first thing I did was to address that roof orientation. My interpretation of the primary roof is the highest gable that is facing the street perpendicular. There's nothing that calls out any formula for the width of that or anything. I'm 1.5 feet, maybe 1.9 feet lower than that primary ridge down to the 2 side roofs, which I addressed as dormers. Maybe they're too long to consider them a dormer, but to me, there is no question when I look at that east elevation that the primary roof is the tallest ridge. And I would like, if possible, maybe to show that diagram from the guidelines. I don't know if we can get it next to that, but to me, what I have there is exactly that diagram. Okay, so the drawing on the right shows the primary ridge line perpendicular to the street, and it is taller than the dormer next to it. I don't see anywhere where it says anything about the length of the roof lines that are below the primary tallest ridge. So to me, I had satisfied that requirement right off the bat by making the center section the tallest primary ridge perpendicular to the street. So I'm surprised that that's not how it's being interpreted, because to me, that's fairly clear. So anyway, I think if you look at those 2 diagrams, you can sort of see where I'm headed with that. But I think Ethan's right. We got to define what is primary. That to me, that has always been primary. The tallest, main, as it's central. When you look at that east elevation, that is the main thing that you see right there is the center section. When I look at the diagram on the right, that's not a wide element. That's the tall one. In fact, I think mine is wider. So I'm not sure where that's coming from. Anyway, so that was my first design goal. The second design goal was to avoid similarities to the Coon residence. I want to make this different. And that's a little tough because we have to have the garages in the front. And again, I am not sure where else you could go with the garage. You know, we discussed back then, you know, how it wouldn't make any sense to have a big long driveway down the side and put the garage on the west side of the lot, which would also incur negative points for a long driveway. So, you know, I'm dealing with having to provide driveways in the front. I looked at, I don't know if you're all familiar with the Sheldon residence, which is the white house to the north of the brown. You know, was there some way to get do a tandem garage where I had one door facing the street and park it tandem like the Sheldons were? And then you kind of see it more on the side. The garage door still faces the street. And to me, that part of the code is pretty black and white. If you have a garage door facing the street, you're going to get negative points. But did look at that, and that wasn't going to work either because the lot slopes down to the west. So there was no opportunity for that without pulling that shed element, if you're familiar with the house I'm talking about, to the east. So I did look at other options, but that's kind of what we're set with. So again, item number 2, try and not have too much similarity with the Coon residence. Item number 3 was to introduce some minor elements to differentiate this from the historic district. And that's encouraged by the code. And I'm going to talk about a couple of those standards when we talk about windows. But that's actually encouraged. Not a lot of differences, but just some minor things to make that transition area not follow exactly the historic, some of the historic things that we require in the historic district. So we'll get to that with windows. So garage door orientation, as I mentioned, we knew that right from the start. That was a pretty much black and white thing, that those are facing the street. So we concur on that. But there were two reasons for doing that. Number one, wanted to differentiate from Coons, didn't want to put the garage on the north side with the garage doors facing south, exactly like that house. So we felt that this location was good, but we also didn't want to have garage doors facing north. We did originally start with that option. And then we decided it was worth the -3 points to have them face the street, because having them face north would require that we had more snow melt for the driveway, because there would be no sun on those garage doors. So we opted in the end to have them face east. Now, hopefully, we have done a good job of mitigating that. We have it set back 42 feet from the street. So this is another 17 feet further west than the Coon residence. And then we piled up with landscaping in front of the garage. So if you look at the landscape plan, and those are all 2-point sized trees, and we're trying our best to make that garage go away. And then the third thing was that the driveway doesn't enter right in front of the garage. The driveway enters in front of the front door. So you actually have to veer from the garage or from the driveway to get into the garage. So I'm hoping with those three things, even though that doesn't change, the black and white on the points, that helps to mitigate that situation quite a bit. So that's it on the garage. Now, next is the driveway material, and I did not realize until last week that we didn't do that, my oversight, because on the Coon residence we did. And I have a diagram of that here, but there was a requirement. What do we have, Chris? Like 10 feet from Briar Rose that we did concrete on. And then we went back to asphalt. So that's what we did there. And I'll certainly speak with the owners and see if there's something that they would be okay with other than asphalt, or if they want to do that same treatment. In either case, we plan to work with staff to do what is acceptable there and get rid of those -3 points for the driveway material. So that item is off the table for us. Then the next section is about the windows and -3 points there. So the two design standards that I'm quoting here are Design Standard 319 that says it's not as critical, because this is the transition area, to follow the same exact window pattern that is in the historic district. And then Design Standard 271 says historic imitations are discouraged. And to me, having two large double hungs up there is just not good. It looks like we are, in fact, trying to imitate the historic district, where clearly those standards for the transition area want us to start introducing a few things that make it a little more contemporary. So what I want to show you right now is this is a photo of the Brad duplex, which is on Harris Street, and it's by the elementary school. And this is a very recent project, and that's in the transition area. And that's exactly where those windows are. Except that in this case, they're combined with large double instead of small. That is a recent precedent on the transom window thing. And yes, Ethan, they are awnings, but we could easily make those double hungs. So that's not really the issue. I feel like it's more like the transom. So with those two design standards, I felt like, the code is actually encouraging some minor differentiation as we make the transition out of the historic district. Let's see, what else do I have here? The metal siding. So I think Susan makes a good point that with the example we have shown, that's all dark siding, and against the white, it would be white contrast. I do want to point out that that's being proposed on the west side of the building. You're not going to see it from the street. And it's also all below grade. So the picture that we showed you from High Street, that is all above grade, all the metal siding in those photos. And this one is just on the lower level and only on the west side. I didn't want to do corrugated because the Coon residence has corrugated. So I wanted to mix in a different material there, and they weren't crazy about doing stone. And honestly, I feel like metal panels are maybe more appropriate than stone anyway. And we also didn't want to do more wood because I feel like the base really does need to be something different around the back. So that is the metal panel discussion. And I think that's all I have. So, any questions?
Okay, Stephen, keep the same order for this hearing.
Well, let me be first to say that I certainly understand you're trying to fit a reasonable sized home on a very small, thin lot. So I don't have a beef at all with that. And I think in my mind, the issue is just, like Ethan said, well, what is the principle or the main or the, however you want to look at it? And I'm just looking at it and I see wide and I don't see long, you know? So, but I'm willing to be convinced otherwise. And that's still just a negative point issue, not an absolute, like the front door was my other issue. I didn't have that issue as much with the other property, but the front door was a big deal for me. And you fixed that, and I love the front door much better, and I'm appreciative of that. In fact, my only really real question is the thought process behind the turnaround in front of the front door. That's made of the permeable pavers. Being a person who wants to be efficient with my movement, first thing I'd do if I came to that house is park right there in front of the front door, because then you get out and you walk about 10 steps and you're in the house as to going over here. So, I mean, certainly you can have it there as a turnaround. My suggestion is to consider the turnaround where it is just east of the garage doors down there that's part snowstack, but that doesn't fail any policies or principles. It's just something that I thought of immediately of how it might be used rather than how it might appear.
Well, I felt that was necessary for the parking spots that are outside, because if you're in the garage, you know, you would turn into this one. But if you're parked in front of the garage, you would back into that one and then go out. And wanted to make it, you know, some different materials so it's not too much asphalt in there.
If I visit the people there, I'll probably pull into the place first, because that's how it is.
Right. I
Did
agree.
you give any consideration to, this I think would be a great place on the corners of the street frontage to put a cottonwood tree or two?
If,
Tie in the historic district cottonwood trees in front.
I think we would just have to replace, because there's no more room really. in the
I
front.
understand you'd have to do some.
So we'd have to,
grading,
maybe 2 of the spruce trees become cottonwoods. I don't think anybody would have an objection to that.
To me, if you want those 2 positive points for landscaping, where I think your landscaping is really paying for a sin, which is the garage door location, I'm going to be more likely to be agreeable to 2 points for public benefit if there were 2 nice cottonwood trees there, kind of like the historic sense. otherwise, I don't see that public benefits a lot from the landscaping. It's just an attempt to allow you to have the street-facing garage doors by putting some visual interruptions between the street and the garage doors. So those are my only issues that I would have with you, with the original design.
Thank you, Janet. So obviously the question of the dominant ridge line, I don't have an answer. I don't know which one it is. It's which one you want it to be, it seems. We don't have a guideline for that, do we? I'll just leave that there.
Well, I think in discussing that, I would like to have those two pictures back up there, the front elevation and the diagram from the handbook. Because to me, it's very clear, the taller one is the primary roof line. I could make that wider maybe, but which would create a taller element there, but then you get a taller house. So.
I don't necessarily disagree with you. I don't really have an opinion. I'm pointing out that there is no guideline for me to reference. I look at it and I see most of the ridge line is perpendicular to the street. And so to me, that's the dominant ridge line. But that's my interpretation, and my bias, as we talked about earlier. But I don't have any skin in this game. I would like for us in the future to have a guideline here. I do, to your point about the handbook, I respectfully disagree. I think that looking at your design, I see more ridgeline because it dominates either side of that tallest ridgeline. Again, I'm just pointing out the technicalities, really. I'll move on from that. I'm not in love with the split of this lot. I never was. I wasn't part of that. But that said, I see your conundrum in designing this, and I personally think you did a good job of it. Where else would you put it? I agree with you that aligning the driveway away from the garage entrances in order to put the screening there solves a lot of your problems, and so I'd give you kudos for that. I want to talk about the driveway material and point a few things out. That it talks about having, I can't remember the verbiage, but having a different, something other than asphalt. To me, if you have to do something more than asphalt, for practicality, you need to heat it, because if you put concrete there, it's going to get totally trashed by the plow trucks, whereas asphalt is repairable, concrete is not. So I have an issue with that guideline. I just wanted to point that out. I don't know what the answer is there, but I just wanted to point that out. On the windows, I don't necessarily have a problem with your front windows. I see your point with that example you gave us. The rear windows, and I wanted to, a little housekeeping, Cliff, you called them square. They are in fact rectangular.
I'm sorry.
So it seems to me, I think the thing that jumps out at me is it's busy. So I tried to look at that and the stepping of 3 doesn't, to me, conform with historically what we've seen. You did point out that this is in a transition area. I tried to look at that. Could you put one window or two double hungs up high next to, I don't know. But that's what I see there. Because it seems a little out of proportion or something. I'll move on from that. On the metal siding, I also want to point out that in staff's report, it said rectangular on your drawings, it's square. On the example, it's of High Street house, it is rectangular. Which do you propose, the square or the rectangular?
I was thinking square.
Okay,
but
that's what it looks like to me.
Minor,
Yeah.
well, we can go either way, so.
Yeah, I just noticed that.
Yeah, we drew it as square. The example on High Street was more to see what those
Right.
panels, not the exact panels.
I-
so, okay.
I understood that. And then I wanted to point out too, what you had said, that was the first thing that jumped out at me. It is on the western elevation. It is on the below grade, and you can't really see it. To Susan's point about the contrast between the white and the dark, I agree with that. But I think that it's because of all those other things, I find it acceptable. So I wanted to state that. That's all I had.
Thanks, Ethan. Elaine?
Thank you for your explanations. It was very helpful for me. I'm pretty new on this, so bear with me. It's nice to hear your background and how you're trying to work with it with us. So I appreciate that. I definitely have concerns with the main ridge line, your interpretation of it. I looked up the definition of main, and it means chief in size or importance. And to me, front doesn't seem super important in chief. So that's my interpretation. And I like also that you seem open to changing maybe the color of the metal panels. So yeah, that's all I have. Thanks.
Susan?
Janet, I didn't hear that you were open to changing the color of the metal panels. Is that correct?
I'm open to anything.
Okay.
That
I don't know what the options are. The only ones I've seen are the ones on High Street.
Yeah, I mean, we can do more research on it and see what else. I thought maybe the rusted was more appropriate for what we see in the historic district,
Mhm.
Which is primarily on corrugated metal. But that's why I was thinking rusted, but we're certainly open to suggestions.
Okay. As far as the window situation, I think that the ones on the east elevation don't really seem that out of character. They are still paned windows, and with that example that you showed us, it seems consistent. As far as the ones on the west elevation, I was wondering whether just one of those windows would suffice. I see Cliff's point about that. I happen to have windows like that in my house, but there are only one at each of the ridge lines. So I'm not bothered by them, per se. It's more the grouping.
Right.
That's all I have.
Any questions?
Comments. First of all, I regret that you felt on defensive. I'm the guy that had the biggest problem with the subdivision, which you have before you. It has nothing to do with you, Janet. You're an exceptional architect. Your work is all over the town. It's all exceptional work. So you shouldn't feel defensive about it. this is the project that you were handed, whether it was subdivided 20 years ago and you ended up with it now. You know, it's a little raw because it's so recent, but don't take it personally.
I won't take it personally.
I think that you've done
not
an
personal.
exceptional job with
Thank
both
you.
of these houses, even though I don't like the project.
Right.
So
Okay.
let me just offer that in terms of comment, moving forward. The window elevation that we're looking at, is going to be something that not a whole lot of people are gonna see.
Mhm.
If those three windows were on the street elevation, I might have a problem with them. I understand what the code says, but I would have a tendency to say that you're gonna have a hard time seeing those windows if you're standing in the backyard. Because you're not gonna see over that gate.
Okay.
So those windows don't really bother me. And I personally think the steel panels may be a nice change from the corrugated, rusted corrugated that we see. And that's all the comments I have.
Thanks, Mark. A couple of things. So one is, I wanna, double down on what Mark said, and, I apologize if you feel from any of us or a commission as a whole on the defense. You know, really, you're doing the best you can, and the point of this process is to work with, your designs, staff, and the commission to come up with something that works great and satisfies your client. You know, the developer, the applicant for the development agreement knew what they were getting into when they subdivided these lots, and they have to work within those restrictions.
Right.
And the buyer of this lot, same thing. If they weren't aware of that, that's, you know, they should have done better research.
Mm.
But I'm sure they were aware of the restrictions they had to work with. So moving forward, let's get to something that works and satisfies the client. First, I just want to say, I'm really happy to see the garage set back that much further. That was an issue I had with the Coon residents, that I still feel that's very garage forward and pretty much right on the sidewalk. So it's nice to see that, and nice to see that you want to put some plantings in front. A question on the garage: if the garage is connected, why is there a side door? Is that just a visual element to break up that wall?
Well, we didn't, they wanted a man door into the garage, and there is one going in through the mudroom, but they wanted one directly into the garage, which is a pretty common ask.
Okay. Yeah.
So it served a dual purpose of also making the north elevation more interesting,
Okay.
since that's their yard area in the front.
Got it. Okay. Well, just as a, having laid out many storage things in garages before, they're gonna miss that wall space to hang stuff, so.
Yeah.
That's something they may want to reconsider. And then, just the only other comment is that metal is going to be facing the south and west. I don't know how it's finished, but it could be very hot to the touch, at the end of the day. So just something that, whether that you put some landscaping so people can't brush up. I don't know where the hot tub's gonna be, but it just, you might want something there so, people don't touch it. That's all I got. So, no public comment, right, on preliminary here? No public comment. So, do we have anyone from the public? No, okay.
I don't see anyone raising their hands.
Okay, great. So we'll close the public comment. So this is a preliminary hearing. So, I think we have 6 questions. Does everyone know where the questions are? So they can refer to them?
52.
Yeah. So, if we can, go through on those questions and providing comments or feedback, so Janet and the applicant can move forward and know how to, proceed. You didn't ask, I guess it's really up to you. You didn't ask us if we felt we were ready for a final hearing. That's not a question at this time.
You know, I think that's a reasonable additional question though, because I mean, I think even if you've,
Do you? let me
with the
let's ask
point,
that.
even to the point analysis, like there's things that could be corrected to probably get to a.
Would you like us to comment if we think this would be ready for a final hearing, Janet?
I obviously have one more question for the commission, and that is about, I think, the primary ridge line, right? Because in the event that the commission decides that isn't the primary ridge line, then I'm looking at a different, isn't that negative points or something? Because it's not a priority policy, it's a design.
Oh, that's right. The ridge line, the garage orientation. Yeah, so you don't have the orientation on here as a question, so let's add.
I think you got -3.
Yeah.
That's specifically design standards 269, so we're all.
Yep.
Because that's my biggest question.
Okay, so let's add, if we can answer ridge line and then the 6 questions. Is that everyone clear on that? Okay, Stephen, do you want to first?
Okay, starting off answering the questions, the unnumbered question ridgeline, I believe that it does not meet design standard 269 and that the main ridge does not run perpendicular to the street. Moving to the numbered questions, question number 1. I've become increasingly convinced that we are handing out 2 points for landscaping like a candy at Halloween, and I don't think people are earning it, which is why I suggested making the landscaping more interesting with a couple of cottonwood trees tying into Breckenridge's history of trees lining the street, which would make me more convinced to give you the 2 points. Otherwise, as I said, I think you're paying for the sin of the garage by planting some trees in front, and there's really not much that's very interesting about that to me. So the answer, the long and short answer is, I don't agree with the +2 for the landscaping. I think you get -3 for the garage doors, even though that's kind of the only place to put them there. So yes, I agree with that. 3. I think, yes, the driveway material doesn't mean the standard, but it's frustrating that we have to answer that question. And I agree kind of with Ethan's theory that that seems to be form over substance, talking about the material of the driveway. But yes would be the answer. 4. Yes, I agree they're an acceptable material. They're interesting. There is an example of it. And it's not prominent in the public's view of the project. Character of the windows, warning a -3 points. I'm really on the fence about that. I think the windows can be tuned up a little bit, but that they're not overly out of alignment. Do I agree with the preliminary point analysis? No, because of the ridge line and the landscaping.
Thank you.
Cliff? I want to make sure the scorekeeper, I wouldn't go to a final because it's still sitting there at -6 and possibly a -9 if the roof line comes out against the project. I mean, I'm confident that Janet will fix all the little stuff, but there's some big numbers there that still need to be fixed. So no, I'm not confident that we're ready for a final.
Thank you, Stephen. Ethan.
So I concur with Steve on the ridge line. However, I would like to see more guidelines for us to determine what is the what is the terminology, dominant or main ridge line. On the landscaping, when I initially looked at it, I kind of agreed with what Steve was saying, but after looking at it more, I realized that there is no trees on the lot, and therefore pretty much anything that we're adding to this is provides public benefit. So I would agree with the positive 2 points there. I do agree that the garage orientation, simply by what you had to work with, it does get 3 points, 3 negative points. And on the driveway materials, I concur with Steve, although it does need to get the 3 points as written. I'm fine with the metal accent wainscot panels. And the windows, I think I think you can work on that a little bit and get there and not incur these 3 points. I don't think that they are completely inconsistent. So I don't know that I agree with a full 3 points, but I think it can be tweaked a little bit. So that said, I don't necessarily agree with the point analysis. I'm not quite getting there with those windows. And I don't believe that we're quite ready for final here.
Thanks, Ethan. Elaine?
Okay, I do not believe that your main ridge is oriented properly. Number one is the landscaping. I agree with the 2 points. Number two was the orientation of the garage. I agree with the -3. Number three was the materials for the driveway. I agree with the -3 there, meets the code requirements. 4 is the metal accent siding. I am unsure. Am I allowed to be unsure? Okay, good. Want to see what you come back with. And 5 for the windows, I'd like to see some tweaks on that. The window you passed around looked a little different than yours because it had like this detail that stuck out past it. Looked like a more modern take on even the one you passed around. And so that leaves me with, yeah, not agreeing to go. Yeah, with it.
Thanks, Elaine.
I guess just to confirm, no, you don't agree with the point analysis, and no, you're not ready for final.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Susan?
Thank you. Well, I think that the lot itself, by being very long and narrow, makes it difficult to have a ridge line that's primarily perpendicular to the street. I think that, what you've done in my mind is, what you can without having a shotgun house that just goes straight back. I think as the landscaping is concerned, I really saw this as a bare lot, and adding all of the trees warranted 2 points. But I'm certainly not opposed to switching out and putting some cottonwoods in there. I think that would be nice. As far as the orientation of the garage, I think, the standard is quite clear, and so the -3 points are warranted. As far as the driveway, I think, again, the language is what it is, and so the -3 would stand there. As far as the metal siding, I'd be interested to see what you come back with, what some of the options might be. More in terms of color, but if the darker material is what's available, I'm open to considering it. Excuse me, as far as the windows, I'm less concerned about the ones on the east side. On the west side, if they could be reduced to one, that might be an option to um, to address that. And so I guess I'm tentatively okay with the point analysis, but I want to see what happens with the windows. And I don't think this is ready for final.
Thanks.
The issue of the ridge line, I look at this house, it's a pretty simple house on a very tight lot. And I think given the simplicity of the house, the complexity of the roof plan is such that I support your definition of the ridge line being the one running perpendicular that you have brought up to a higher elevation than the rest of the roof. Does the commission agree with the landscaping plan getting 2 points? I do. I feel that if we can give 2 points for EV chargers, we can give 2 points for nice landscaping on a lot that has none. Does the commission agree with the orientation of the garage? That's what the code says, so yes, I agree with the 3 points there. The driveway material, again, I think Ethan has raised a good point here, but the 3 points are what we have to do. Does the commission believe the proposed rectangular metal wainscoting, as I said in my comments, I really don't have a problem with that, and it might be a nice variation to the corrugated. The windows, in my comments, I said I didn't have a problem with the windows, so I don't agree with the 3 points there. So therefore, I don't agree with the point analysis as it stands right now.
Final.
I think it probably needs to go through a revision before we get the final.
Thanks, Mark. In terms of the ridge line, I think the primary ridge line is what you see from the street. Even though I think technically, yes, on the plans or a bird's eye view or from the side of the house, you might see that there is a whole ridge line going east-west. But I think the point is from the point of view of someone walking down Briar Rose, what they see. I think putting the guidelines next to your drawing, there was only one gable going out to the right, so there was not a picture showing 2 gables going out to the right that are also longer, which is what gives me the impression that there's a north-south ridge line. I think like my fellow commissioners, I agree that 2 points for the landscaping for a lot that has nothing but scrub on it now I agree with that, although putting in a couple of cottonwoods would make it even better. I agree based upon the design standards that -3 points for the garage orientation is correct, and -3 points for the materials is on the driveway is also correct. We might want to consider a change to that standard. I actually like the metal accent, and I think the contrast. I'm sure there must have been some homes back in the day that were painted white and had metal, and there was contrast. So I actually like the idea of not seeing everything all brown, and it is the transitional area, so I would support that. And based on the standards, I think the windows are not inconsistent, so they are consistent with the standard. I mean, there's aesthetic opinions on this, but I leave that up to the homeowner and the architect. So, based on that, I don't agree with the current point analysis, and I guess it'd probably be best to go for another preliminary hearing. Also, just to point out, because I remember we went through this with Kuhn, if you are going to be making significant changes, I know we had an issue where you thought some things were accepted and were approved, and then they, based on some changes, we had some comments on other things that you thought were a done deal. So perhaps a preliminary hearing would be best before we go to final.
Thanks. I got one more clarifying question. For those of you that basically did not believe the design complied with 269, since it is a relative policy, how many negative points would you recommend assigning? So it's probably something for her to consider if she's trying to trim points. She may keep that design for that ridge line, but take the negative points if that's.
I think the precedent would be -3.
Okay.
That would just be my position. I don't want to speak for anybody else. One other comment, though, that I'd like to make about the metal panels, and I didn't think about this until, I don't know who maybe said it. A lot of these areas where the metal panels are even under the deck and under overhang, which makes them even more less visible than anything, and will protect them from the heat too.
Yeah,
to a
that's true.
certain degree. So
Does everyone else that found non-compliance of 269 agree with the -3 recommendation?
I think so. How does everyone else feel if we do?
I have
assign
nothing to
negative
base
points?
it on. I have no experience.
I think if that's what staff decides, I don't necessarily concur with that decision, but if that's what staff decides, then that's,
I mean, I think we thought originally,
she knows what the deal is.
I mean, we originally said that I think the votes were that it didn't comply. So I just want to make sure we give her solid advice when she's redesigning.
I want to reiterate that I don't know that it complies. I don't have any guideline for it.
No, it sounded like from the notes I had that the majority thought it did not comply. We're agreeing with Steven's position. There's a couple of people that did think it complied, but I think the majority was it. They found the primary ridge line to be the one that ran parallel because it was visible. So based on that non-compliance, we're just asking what the appropriate negative points to award is, so she can budget her negative points for the next hearing.
I understood the question. I'm just reiterating that. Yes, I think that the ridge line that runs parallel with the street is the primary. But I have nothing to base that on. There's no guideline for me to follow. And so I would strongly recommend that we have a guideline. Because I see Janet's point to it. So it's such a gray area and such open to interpretation that
That's why you're here.
I understand that. I understand that, but so
At this point, I looked up the definition as well, and I came to the same one, and don't really have anything more to add other than kind of your gut, interpretation. And I think that collectively that for right now, but I mean, it's something in the future, maybe we can try and flesh out or give a definition for.
yeah, as it stands, I don't agree with Janet's interpretation, but I'd like more guidance there.
I just concur with what Steve said in terms of precedent -3. Now, the code allows us to go up to -15. I don't know when we've ever really gone more than -3 on any individual policy in the design standards. So, that's essentially what Chris was saying is -3 is sufficient.
Now, that comment is about this particular issue or any issue, you're allowed to go up to -15.
Any issue that
Okay.
there's a multiplier,
Okay.
but it's almost always been -3 is not a precedent that we set.
Can the staff pull some maybe images of past ones and show us their points in the past to provide us some guidance on that?
But yeah, in this transition area, really the only precedent is from the Coon residents under
Okay.
these standards. So we have one project exactly
Okay.
to base it on.
Further.
I haven't seen
I
that
haven't
one, so.
I can talk to
Well, in that case, I would agree with that 3-point analysis.
Thanks.
Okay,
We else ready to move on?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I just wanted to make sure Janet had her math straight before she left.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thanks.
Okay, we have no work sessions. So I guess last on the agenda is town council update.
Let's see, the council approved an ordinance regarding outdoor display of merchandise, which just added a few items that were allowed to be displayed outside beyond our typical outdoors. We also had two local landmarkings that Chris took through, the Howe residence and the Case residence. Those were just kind of housekeeping to follow up the development permits with the actual landmarking of the property. Assuming both of those had 3 basement buildings associated with them. So that was a condition. So those are approved on first reading. They'll go to second reading. Council. There's a lot of discussion, and this was actually followed up separately by a special meeting last Friday, but about Wellington Road. Proposed during the construction of Staples and having to lay sewer line across Wellington Road. And we're actively seeking good solution on that. The council gave direction on Friday to move towards a solution that would move that sewer line away. It was originally gonna go kind of under the culvert by the bridge area there over to Little Red Pool House. Instead, we're gonna try to route it down towards the corkscrew at the time there. And so part of that is working with Excel Energy across their property, which is going to reduce the price significantly if we don't have to tear up all the asphalt right away to lay that sewer line. So we do have some a significant part of town land that we can for and along for. But that's been a big issue, and obviously whenever something is going to affect a lot like that, it's lots about it. So yeah, so anyway, the one thing to be clear on that is under any scenario, French Creek Road, County Road 450, Ryland Road, whatever you want to call it, it's gonna be open out. So it's gonna be available. It's just that a lot of folks like to come down now. Let's see, then we had a discussion, Sarah brought the net zero construction code amendment that you guys looked at a month or 2 ago to them, and they didn't have any issues, so we'll be taking that first and second. And finally, we had a discussion with DGD about their development proposal, and it really was focused on where should housing be located, either on the North Gondola lot or on the North Gold Rush lot. And there was a fair amount of discussion, questioning about that, benefits of either. Staff had actually taken a position that thought it made more sense over on the gondola lot. Just put the employees, people working in the workforce housing closer to the transit center downtown. Map to the structure itself, at least a couple of acres. But at the end of the day, the council agreed that they wanted to see the housing move on to North Gold Rush, and the reason for that is primarily because North Gold Rush with that hillside there provides an opportunity to kind of screen the view that you're going to see of the parking structure and the housing. And there's also the trees out front that we're going to try to preserve through that process. And they also, end of the day, number of council members just didn't want to see any type of large development. on North Mountain. They wanted to see that more just that busy. So that's where council ended up laying on that one. That's kind of going to go forward is decisions on the first two of the 6 building sites that we're discussing. You know, we'll iron out the details on that. The housing issue was PGD has to provide roughly about 45 units for their employee housing mitigation for our development code. But then they were going to also offer up perhaps an equal number to Vail. Vail's indicated they're very interested in how to engage more and do something as well. So it's really a question of what can fit over here. So that's still to be ironed out exactly the number of units that will be developed on those. But council was kind of, let's keep the number a little bit lower than what they started out with.
I'm trying to remember.
Still own the housing across from the Breckenridge maintenance area?
The terraces? Yeah.
Terrace?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, they still own that.
Would they be amenable to redeveloping that property at a higher density? In other words, tear all that down, make higher density housing there? They could probably double the amount of units that they have if they were amenable to that.
Yeah, I don't know if that they would or not, but I know no one's asking that question.
And going back to Mark's, I guess, question, I'm trying to remember if it was 270 beds or if it was, I think it was beds they originally proposed, which is roughly like half of that, like 135 units, and now they're down in the neighborhood of 80 units.
I'm sorry, Stephen, I have a question. You got-
Go ahead.
Is there a plan to still build a garage big enough that could eventually, that would have as many spots as the north lot, or would be a smaller garage now?
It's just gonna accommodate what they have right now on the north and south Gold Rush.
Okay.
The south Gold Rush is gonna have the duplex, that's what they're proposing there, is those duplex that we saw before. So they have to offset that by putting that over, and that's gonna necessitate them going up one level.
Okay. And additional parking for whatever employees.
Correct.
there. Got it. So once they do that, then that would eliminate a place to put parking if they ever did want to develop, if anyone came up with a acceptable plan for the north lot. That parking would have to go down Airport Road or something.
There'd have to be,
Yeah.
a lot more discussions, cause
Yeah.
that's all part of the parking agreement between the town.
Yeah,
and the city.
yeah, got it.
They have to maintain 1,560 space.
Yeah.
South, north, and Gondola, and then Gold Rush.
Yeah.
And they can't count the new spaces that are in the parking structure here.
Yeah.
Where did the discussion go about the roundabout and about how they're gonna get all these people across Park Avenue if they put all of them over there?
So I think roundabout is definitely council's like, yeah, that's our expectation we're gonna have. But I think they are pushing Udick towards a solution of like a tunnel overpass, something like that. Get people under, and then still recognizing you're gonna have to do something to try to dissuade people from sheep going across Park Avenue. You know, if you live over there, you wanna go to the grocery store, might not, you're up at the.
There's
north end, you
camper
may not wanna
across the
walk all
street.
way down. Yeah, there's some engineering in terms of it has to happen there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that differentiates a little bit from the past application was just with the housing is you're not having people like in Ski Gear. It's to be more dispersed. It's not to be concentrated as much. And there's also the condition about not having that lot used until the other lots are full. So it'll be versus where all the parking was going to be proposed with the development, all day skier parking would have been North Gold Rush. Now that's to be used about the same pace that it's currently used, where the across the street is primary. So, and you look at a comparably sized housing project like Pinewood One, you know, across the street from Park Avenue, we're not having a ton of issues of people sheet flowing, you know, holding up traffic. So I think those were some of the things they thought about in terms of, you know, potential conflicts or why it's different than the last go around.
Mark, did council discuss BGV's proposal to transfer density up to this above the ski area, up above Timber Trail?
So that's coming, start next week, Mark. Okay.
So that hasn't been discussed yet.
No, I mean, Dudick has already said, my whole idea here to make this all work is the density that's on that north gondola lot is gonna get moved to these other areas, and that's why I need a development agreement to make this all happen. So yes, starting next week, we'll be talking about essentially in addition to Timber Trail subdivision. And then shortly after that, we'll be talking about the admin site, which is the old East Bay Gate Hotel site.
It'd be interesting.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting stuff. But we'll keep you abreast.
Okay. Anything else? Oh, good.
A lot.
Okay. Take a metal panels. All right, the Town of Breckenridge
You know what,
Planning
you're probably
Commission
better
meeting
off
is
for it.
adjourned.
I like that stuff. I'm gonna go